Back in January, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy committed to holding a vote on term limits during his negotiations to become House Speaker. Did he uphold that pledge, or is he now backing out of it? Scott Tillman joins me now, National Field Director for U.S. Term Limits. Scott, welcome back.
Thank you, Lars. Glad to be here.
Is Kevin McCarthy reneging on that promise?
Looks like he's trying to bend it to get his own way to really a dead-end purpose. He's just trying to make it 12-12, which is 20 years overall, 24 years overall, over 20 years in the House and Senate for politicians, which isn't what was agreed to. We had this discussion. Ralph Norman's bill is for 3 House and 2 Senate terms, which is 6 and 12, which is what the American people want. And they're trying to go through a 12-12, even knowing that it's not going to go anywhere in the Senate, which seems to, I mean, if Republicans want to, make some hay and actually get something that people are excited about, why water it down on the front end when you know it's not going anywhere?
Well, I wanted to know why. Why would they go to this? Just to deliberately torpedo the idea itself, or because there were incumbents or early termers, I guess you'd call them, those who are not yet near those terms, who would say, yeah, that'll give me enough room to get the years I want to get in? Which one do you think it is?
I think you get this politicians that bristle. These politicians, they just bristle at the idea of term limits, and they want to extend it and do anything they can to they kind of lose their political sense. We see this with a lot of stuff we do in states and with talking with politicians as compared with talking with regular people around the country. When you say term limits, politicians, they go kind of weird. I want to say they go a little bit stupid when you talk about that, and sometimes they just give this idea that they want to push the limit as much as they can.
Well, and I wonder about this because there have even been a few examples. I'm trying to search for one of them that I can remember directly, where members would-be politicians have run for a spot in the Congress. They win it on a promise that they'll impose their own self-imposed term limit. And then once they get back to Washington, D.C., they find out they like it too much, and they simply revoke their own promise. What could we actually do? Go ahead.
The most recent one is the best example recently is Mark Wayne Mullen, who's now one of the senators from Oklahoma. He had ran and signed our pledge, but our pledge is to support a constitutional amendment. But he had also gone on his own and pledged to his constituents that he was only going to serve for a certain amount of time. And then later on decided to tell everybody that God spoke to him and told him that he needed to serve longer. But he's not the only one. There are lots of people that go and make a pledge like that. And what we want is something that's going to apply to everybody equally, which is what we need is a constitutional amendments, so we have a level playing field. But some of these politicians, they just get really weird on the subject.
Well, tell me this. Is there anything we could do structurally to the job that would make it more attractive to go back, do what you want to get done, stand up for the issues you want to stand up for, and then leave?
I think that we send a whole bunch of people who have all their own personal interests over, in some cases, thousands of miles away to Washington, D.C., and you put them all in one, central geographic area for the lobbyists to kind of influence. And it warps who they are and how they act. So I think other things that we could do that would improve, number one, of course, being term limits, just to rotate them out there so that you're constantly getting new blood in that's closer to its constituency. But the other thing is geographically move them back to closer to their constituency. When most state legislators meet, they're meeting for a given amount of time and then they go home. And normally they're not camping out and, buying second homes in the Capitol and living there. That's a bit of a problem too. And it's understandable, years ago, people had to travel a long way and it was a part-time job, but now it's not. They're there all the time coming up with different things to do. And they're really not there all the time doing the people's work, but they're there all the time claiming that they are. They're not by their constituents. They don't have to take a vote and then walk outside and see the people whose lives that vote will impact. They go out and see the people who are buying them dinners and jump on the phone and call fundraisers and things like that. It detaches them. And term limits are really about bringing the constituents, back into focus for these legislators instead of going away and, being in Washington and becoming a creature that is more representative of the government or more representative of bureaucracy or the special interest groups. Now you're somebody who has run, you're close to the voters, and you got a short time, 6 years, 3 terms. Get in there and get that done. And if you can't compromise, if you can't figure out a way to work with the other side, you're going to have to go home and tell people my legacy is nothing because for 6 years I couldn't figure out a way to do something that was palatable to everybody.
I just wonder, Scott, one of the crazy ideas I threw out a few years ago was I wish we'd get rid of the rule that says you have to be there in person to vote. Now, they did a bit of that during the pandemic, but my argument was similar to yours, and that is if a member of Congress spends most of his time in his home district and he doesn't have to be there for committee hearings, but he can participate remotely. He doesn't have to be there for votes. He can participate remotely. They still might want to be back there because of all the reasons you just cited. But if you said, hey, we expect you to spend a lot of time in your district actually being able to communicate with your constituents, and when you're participating remotely, maybe your constituents could come actually, watch and see you, participate and say, boy, you asked some bad questions there, Congressman, because that's what I usually think when I see those hearings.
Very, very right. They kind of did like the worst case scenario where they allowed people to do proxy votes. So instead of you having to be there, you don't have to be there, but somebody's going to be there and they get to vote for you. So they like made the worst of the situation when they had the opportunity in COVID to set up an opportunity for legislators to vote from home. What McCarthy doesn't realize in this particular case is there's 105 of 222 Republicans in the House that have pledged to support 3 terms in the House and no longer limit. And if he has a vote for 12 years, he's going to force either those people to break their pledge, which, the public at large has a very low view of politicians' word anyways. Why would you want to encourage them to publicly break their pledge? Or to go in and have to not vote for term limits. It's a really dirty thing. What they need to do is give these legislators the opportunity to vote on a clean bill. This is a 70 to 80% issue for constituents, Republicans and Democrats. They need to go in and give these folks an opportunity to vote for a clean 3-2 bill, 3 House terms, 2 Senate terms, which is what the people support. Let them get that cred. There's no real risk. If they want, they could grandfather themselves in. But the people want term limits, and it's time for term limits.
No, I totally agree with you. The other thing I thought about was getting rid of seniority. The fact that you've been around forever, whether it's my job or your job or a job of a congressman, the idea that you get more status, you get more privilege, you get to be House Judiciary Committee chair, some important chair position just by hanging around the longest time. Does that necessarily make sense? Or would it make more sense if you said you can't have those anymore? You can't do this based on seniority. We'll do it based on who can do the best job. That's Scott Tillman. He's National Field Director for U.S. Term Limits. Scott, thanks very much.